Hey, do you ever think about how crazy it is that video games are only like 50 years old? Well, 60 when you count the experimental stuff. I mean, film and animation and everything, or at least twice that, and there are some art forms like plays that go back hundreds of years, and yet a medium that might be younger than your dad has become the biggest, most expensive, technically impressive entertainment industry in the world. Games like GTA 6 are human achievements. With the number of man hours they're putting into that thing, you could put someone on the moon. It's going to make an amount of money so large we don't have numbers to count it, and it's just one of many, many games in development right now. It's kinda crazy if you think about it. In only the course of not even one lifetime, gaming went from blocky pixels moving around a screen to lifelike full open worlds and VR simulations that tell interesting and complex stories and have incredibly deep and intricate gameplay. That is a really impressive feat, and a level of growth almost nothing else has ever matched. And I don't think gaming gets enough credit for that. This insanely quick progression is even more interesting when you realize it's essentially baked into the medium. Video games, since their inception, have been heavily tied to computing. The entire medium was basically invented by hackers trying to test the limits of what computers could do, with games like Space War and Pong being developed as tech demos and exercises. Even when games started being sold commercially and consoles and arcade cabinets became more ubiquitous, the games developed for them were always pushing forward. You know, the Goombas in Mario only exist because they ran out of storage space for more enemies and just retextured a mushroom and flipped the image back and forth to make a walk cycle. The fixed camera angles in Resident Evil exist so they could pre-render the backgrounds and save polygons for the characters and enemies. A lot of early games were constantly coming up with clever strategies to get the most out of the limited hardware they were given. One of the most famous examples that you might know if you're at all into PC gaming is Doom. Developed by id Software and released in 1993, the game was mostly programmed by actual insane person John Carmack, who is the closest we will ever have to a real-life computer wizard, since he decided to optimize and beef up the engine of their previous Wolfenstein 3D to get Doom to run on basically anything with a chip in it, then released the source code of the game for free in 1997, leading to people to this day hacking everything from smart fridges to that shitty Rabbit AI thing to get them to play the game. Contrast this with the other famous Can It Run Blank game, which is known for the exact opposite reasons. Released in 2007 as a pretty okay sci-fi action shooter, Crysis isn't that memorable for plot or gameplay. I mean, it's not even the most popular franchise with Cry in the title that the studio would launch, but it does have an incredible legacy, because for some reason, Crytek just decided to go fucking insane when it came to the graphics in the game, pushing them so far that Crysis was nearly impossible to run at max settings with consumer-level hardware. It was literally ahead of its time because you needed a graphics card that wasn't publicly available yet to get the most out of the game, meaning it could be used as a benchmark for performance years after it came out. But that's the thing, gaming has always been inextricably tied to computer culture, in obvious ways like the associations people have with companies like Nvidia, and in less obvious ones, like how the Xbox is short for Direct Xbox, because it used Microsoft's DirectX technology to make it easier for PC developers to make games for the console. DirectX ironically being the thing you needed on your PC for it to not explode when you tried to run Crysis. And this computer nerd drive to improve technology is still very much around. However, there have been obvious diminishing returns over the years. The leap from the PS1 to the PS2 is bigger than the PS2 to the PS3, which is much bigger than the PS4 to the PS5. Probably because the PS5 has no games. I mean, games are still looking better and better every year, but there's 5 new titles every week that look pretty similar to the last few titles, and a lot of the big players when it comes to innovation take years to release. Plus, older games will often get re-released and remastered, coloring our perception of what they looked like. So game to game, generation to generation, it's harder to notice the improvement as it's happening. We are inevitably approaching a point where hardware upgrades and console generations aren't gonna mean much. The tools and tech available to game studios are already so plentiful that many games don't use them all. But even if we're not anywhere close to hitting that wall, we're slowing down as we approach it. So to a lot of people, it's really easy to say things haven't gotten better. And speaking of things that I want to look better, my skin. I don't know. I've partnered with Geology for this sponsored video, and I have no idea how to write a segue into that. Listen, they can't all be good transitions. Geology is a 35-time award-winning skin, hair, and body care company that creates simple and effective skincare and hair care routines customized just for you, with ingredients that are proven to work and trusted by dermatologists. Most people, like myself, know the importance of a skincare routine but don't know where to start, which is why Geology creates a simple and effective routine personalized just for you, to get the results you want to see. Just do a 60-second quiz, tell them your skin goals, and they'll develop a routine and deliver it right to your door. store. After my quiz, I got this everyday face wash for my sensitive skin, some night cream, some morning cream with SPF, and some eye cream for the dark circles under my eyes that I keep getting because I keep staying up late writing these videos. With over 10,000 5-star reviews and 35 prestigious awards, including nods from Men's Health and the Oprah Daily Grooming Awards, it's clear that Geology is people-proven skincare. They've got easy-to-stick-to routines and products tailored just for you, and they pride themselves on efficacy. It isn't just about looking and feeling good, it's about delivering real results. So stop wasting time sifting through endless products. Head on over to Geology using the link in the description and use my code to get 70% off your personalized skincare trial set and up to 50% off on any add-ons that you add to the trial. It's a great way to get started on your skincare journey. Thank you to Geology, and back to the video. So while I was making my last video, I finally got around to beating the new Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. And as someone who has played through all of the big FromSoft, Soulsborne, Kiro, whatever you want to call them games, something that immediately grabbed me is this idea of iterative design. Essentially how a studio can learn from a game they made, figure out how to improve some stuff, and put those improvements to work in the next game. Or how they can find something people really liked about one of their games and sort of focus more on that in the next. This is something that a lot of developers do. FromSoft isn't unique here, but I do think they're really good at it, and it's been fun to see their evolution through all of the games that I've played. One of the things that I thought was really cool was how when Elden Ring came out and people were struggling with Malenia, a boss that is very quick and fluid and susceptible to parrying, people said, hey, this is kind of like Sekiro. If this was a Sekiro boss, it would probably be much easier. And so one of the first upgrades you can get in Shadow of the Erdtree, or at least the first one you can visibly see when you start the DLC, is something that lets you parry enemies like Sekiro. I thought that was neat, and something that shows FromSoft either listens to their fans or independently had a similar train of thought. Because you go and fight most of the bosses in the DLC and in the main game with this Sekiro ability, and it's way easier, especially for someone like me who's already played Sekiro and learned that mechanic. Something else people like me criticized about the main game was that the story and NPC questlines felt sparse. So the DLC has this very direct storyline that involves a ton of characters who can kind of change their ending depending on your choices. People complained about the catacombs, so they all got revamped to much bigger dungeons that usually lead to other areas. There's just a lot of stuff where you can tell the devs saw the shortcomings of the main game and it influenced their design for the DLC. Now, not every addition is amazing. The complaint of over-leveling in the main game is solved with a collectible item that still left me in the exact same position as before, where I was massively under-leveled for some bosses and then collected all the items and steamrolled all the other bosses. Except the final boss, who is a nightmare of difficulty that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Because he is my worst enemy, fuck that guy. But these are still iterative decisions. They are adding on to the previous experience and trying to improve it. The level up system is an early response to the massive challenge of open world game design. The final boss isn't batshit hard out of nowhere, it's just harder than everything that came before. It's using all of the tools they have at their disposal, and it comes alongside all these additional options they've given to help you beat them, like the Sekiro ability. If they have gone too far, which I think they have, it's part of this continual process, where they can learn from it and make a better final boss next time, or even just patch this one to tone it down. Something they already did with the last bullshit hard boss from the main game, who coincidentally is the same fucking guy. Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree aren't these distinct products built in a vacuum. None of FromSoft's games are. They're points on a line that is trying its best to always move upward. Because keep in mind, this iteration is the only reason Elden Ring exists in the first place. It's the only reason it's good or popular. The only way they'd make this big, intricate, interconnected world is if people loved Dark Souls back in 2011. They're only making Souls-like games in the first place because people liked Demon Souls in 2009. And the incredible lore and story and world design their games are known for has been something they've been working on since, I don't know, Kingsfield? The point is, you do not get a game like Elden Ring first try. You can assemble a talented group of people to make something, but it's going to be really hard to replicate the success of a team that's been working together with the same director on the same types of games on the same engine for over 10 years. Yeah, all of their games are on one custom in-house engine that they've just been adding stuff to since like 2006, by the way. There have been specific mechanics and bosses and ideas in FromSoft games that have gone too far or not far enough. You've gotten things like Bed of Chaos or that fuck-ass snow level from DS2. But the strength of a developer who has been around for a while isn't their ability to just make something good first try, it's in how they make something better on the next. And again, FromSoft isn't unique in this. Tears of the Kingdom was as good as it was because it's the same director they've had since Skyward Sword, with the same producer since Twilight Princess, with the same team for the last several games, building off of Breath of the Wild. They could only get wacky with it and include that much content and detail because they're not starting from scratch. And that specific idea for mashing a bunch of parts together to make contraptions was something they only discovered from people trying to do that in the last game. Even id Software, from back at the beginning of the video, made 4 first-person shooters before Doom. You do not get one of the greatest games ever made without a Hover Tank 1 or a Catacombs 3D. Even John Carmack credits his optimization on the Doom engine to porting Wolfenstein 3D to the fucking Super Nintendo and trying to get that to work. So it's not a coincidence that FromSoft and Nintendo, creators of some of the best games of the last few years, have also kept their talent around as long as they have. That they've both been outspoken about not laying anyone off. That's kinda really important, because game development, like any creative endeavor, is an iterative process, and you need to have been able to have finished something in order to improve on it. Especially if that thing you finished before wasn't the most successful. That's the best way you learn. And I think letting people learn is something the industry ironically needs to learn, because without that, you're not getting any of these great games. It is actually incredible how big indie games have gotten over the years. I still remember watching Indie Game the Movie back in 2012 and seeing how cool these solo projects were, and over 10 years later, the level of quality has just gone up exponentially. Something like Super Meat Boy or Braid used to be this award-winning achievement, and now games like Celeste and Pizza Tower and Animal Well are all over the place. It feels like at any point you can just pull up Steam's front page and find an indie game released that day that's bound to— oh, never mind, that's hentai. The main couple things that have caused this explosive growth have been the increase in resources, inspiration, and competition. To make a game by yourself back in the day before YouTube and Unity tutorials was a monumental task, because on top of creating the entire thing yourself, you also had to learn everything about all the stuff you used to make it. And aside from some textbooks explaining certain concepts and programming languages, and maybe documentation for the software you were using, you had nothing to go off of. So of course, as all of those individual pieces got more attention and people willing to make tutorials and share insights, it got way easier to make a game. Compounded by the fact that a lot of these pieces, like Blender or Unity or Godot, got more and more open to the public. You have more options, more people willing to teach you those options, and more people working to make those options better, making your job even easier. Anyone can make a game. I cannot stress that enough. You need zero prior knowledge or experience with anything, because all of it is available to you online. I went to school for 4 years to learn how to code and design these things, but if I had spent those same 4 years just grinding away at a project, I'd be so far ahead it's not even funny. Also, possibly not $60,000 in debt. So because anyone can make a game, a lot of people do, and we have more games than ever. And the cool part about having more games, even in the AAA space where they're so big and technical that one person couldn't possibly dream of replicating them, is that they all serve as inspiration. Every game that comes out is a game that then exists forever to give you an idea to make a new one. And a lot of the best ideas are just other ideas smashed together. Harvest Moon and pixel graphics, Stardew Valley, Dark Souls, Metroidvania, Hollow Knight, roguelike deck builder and gambling, Balatro. None of these are like concepts nobody else could ever come up with. Someone just had the will to make them, and they made them really good. So on top of this idea of iteration we've discussed within one studio, you have this whole other realm of iteration on top of pre-existing games from other people. And that's what's driven a lot of the most creative ideas and projects across all of gaming, but especially in the indie space, because competition is so much more fierce. Now it's not just that you're making a new game by yourself or with a small team, now you're making a game to hopefully be better than the last one made by one person or a small team. And you're competing with theoretically anybody that just sits down one day and wants to make something. The bar has been set. Indie Game the Movie is already out there. People have become billionaires developing video games. So there is all this push and drive to get better and better, faster and faster, in an environment that is able to push things out and evolve quicker than the big developers can. And the result for players is just a ton of games all coming out all the time that are constantly improving. You get games like Hades and Sifu that look like they could be made by a studio 10 times their size, Inscription and Outer Wilds, which seem to permanently affect the people who play them, War Thunder, which I just found on an IGN list of top 100 indie games. Above Castle Crashers? Who fucking wrote this thing? We are getting to the point where we're actively blurring the definition of indie game because these studios are getting so big that they're getting picked up by and competing with AAA publishers. And that's an absolute nightmare to try and argue about in the comments of a YouTube video, but it's a blessing for the community, who reap the rewards of all of these games that are much bigger and more expansive than ever before. So video games are getting better technologically, they're getting better game to game, and even between different developers they're getting better as it becomes easier to make them, more people get into the industry, and competition increases. That sounds to me like things are better than they've ever been. And yet, for every positive point I've made, you could make an equally negative one. Graphics are improving slower and slower, so companies are remastering old games instead of focusing on new ones, because it's cheaper and makes easy money. GTA 6 is taking about a decade to make, with an unhealthy long development cycle and a rumored cost of over $2 billion just to look as good as it does. Companies like FromSoft and Nintendo are rarities in the current industry, with bigger competitors like Microsoft more willing to just close an entire studio even after they release an award-winning game. Meaning very few game devs have the ability to learn and iterate on prior releases because in all likelihood they might just get fired after one. That competition in the indie scene means that if you're not grinding yourself to the bone to make something that can compete with the best the industry has to offer, you might not sell enough copies to make a living, with even high-profile developers like Jonathan Blow re-releasing old games to terrible sales in an attempt to get by. It would be incredibly easy for me to flip this entire video on its head and scare you by bringing up all the problems surrounding the industry, tell you how all these good things are actually bad. And that's common territory for videos like this to get into. I've ended many videos on my channel in a similar way. But now, I really want to ask why. Because the one part of gaming that I think certainly feels like it's getting worse lately is sentiment. How people are talking about the industry and the way we're discussing it online. That feels demonstrably more negative than it was even a few years ago. You've got constant videos and tweets and articles saying gaming is dead, this studio is ruined, this franchise isn't the same anymore. Just a never-ending stream of people saying that things are worse than ever. And it's really frustrating to see that when they're often not. Like just recently, I saw a tweet regarding Helldivers 2. Big game, you might have heard about it, absolutely took over the internet for a while. And this tweet was saying that the game had completely fallen off. Quote, "It is truly astounding how a company turned their Game of the Year contender into a desolate wasteland in just 6 months." And that's just wrong. Helldivers 2 has an active daily player base of over 38,000 people every day. That is what it's had for months. The game is still one of the most active on all of Steam, but it had a balance patch that some people didn't like, so they have to talk about the game like it's dying. In fact, that's a very common way to speak about a game you don't like. To say it's dead because it doesn't have anyone playing it. Something people repeat so much you'd think there was a problem with games retaining their audience. Yet, in 2019, the number of games on Steam with over 10,000 active daily players was about 26. In 2024, that number is over 100. So again, the sentiment of gaming feels much worse than the problems actually are, and the actual problems are much older and more common than you might think. Need I remind you, the developers featured in Indie Game the Movie have been on record to say they often worked so hard they forgot to eat, because indie game development in 2009 was so stressful and competitive. The gaming industry had so many layoffs leading into 2012 that news outlets compiled lists of companies and employees affected in the same way they made a chart in 2023. And the tally was over 11,000 people. And drives to push graphics forward have been expensive, risky endeavors since Final Fantasy VII spent $21 million on just hardware for the game, which is still to this day one of the most expensive ever made. None of these problems are new. You can say that they've gotten worse recently, but you can also say that the industry has just gotten much larger. Games are more profitable, so they get bigger budgets and more time to make them. There's more people working in the industry to lay off, more indie success stories to hear tales of crunch from. Now, that doesn't mean these aren't problems, it doesn't mean they're not bad. In fact, these issues being so prevalent for so long should probably tell you we need to fix them, but none of this is evidence that gaming is dead or getting worse. And yet people keep on saying that. Because we really underestimate how powerful negativity is. Getting someone to feel a negative emotion is one of the most effective ways you can get them to care about something, to get them to act. In my case, I like to talk about issues in different industries and bring awareness to them and get people invested. You might not give a shit about game developers, but if I show you a game you liked and how hard people worked on it and how bad they got treated and how the studio got shut down, well, now suddenly you might care a little bit. And getting you to care can get you to act when another studio needs support, or when workers go on strike, or when greedy executives do something bad and people should go after them. Now, that's my reasoning to use negative emotion to persuade people, and everyone does it. It's not an inherently bad thing, but it can be used for a bad purpose. You can have reasons to use it that aren't great, especially on social media, where it gets you more attention, views, and followers the more negative you are. 15K likes on a tweet that isn't even true. People have realized that they can get more attention to their cause if they tell you that everything is fucked and the industry is dying and developers hate you and you need to stop them. So that's the fuel for so many discussions online. It's the secret sauce behind a lot of the discourse. Keep people feeling bad because it's the best way to get them on your side. And this is why sentiment feels like it's getting even worse, even if everything else is getting better. When you look at gaming from a bird's eye view over a several-year time span, it's a very positive trend. It's a line going up with dips and dives here and there, but ultimately a lot of improvement. But when you zoom in on any specific moment in time, of course you're going to find tons of issues and problems and scary trends that seem very threatening, especially when you're living through them. And the sort of paradox of it all is that these issues can be very real, and just because things might get better anyways doesn't mean we shouldn't try to fix it right now. It doesn't mean we shouldn't care. But we also shouldn't let the negativity consume us. We shouldn't spend every waking moment stressing out about this, thinking the whole world is falling apart, because there's only so much we can do. And too many bad emotions can just lead to us giving up entirely. Being negative about the industry can ironically be used in a very positive way. I don't think we should just stop using it entirely, even if such a thing were possible, but I do think we should be more aware of how we're using it. And we should definitely be more aware of how others are using it against us, because it can color our perception over time, make us think things are worse than they really are. So to answer the question of is gaming better than ever, I think yeah, personally it is. But I don't think it's better because graphics are prettier, or games are more complex, or studios are more plentiful. I think it's better because we have the power to make it better. We've always had the power to make it better. And I've seen firsthand that when you give people that power, they'll use it. And they have used it, despite the issues and the problems and the scary trends. They've used that power and pushed forward. They've worked toward the common goal that we all have, to make this the best space it can possibly be. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.